earth. As a Unitarian Universalist congregation, we aspire to follow 7 principles, including respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. If you believe that every member of Earth's Ohana is part of this web and has the right to be cared for and loved, then this is the place for you. And while you're here, you're invited to be engaged with your whole spirit. There are a variety of announcements and activities included in your bulletin, or if you're an email subscriber, in the e-blast that you received. And I just want to bring your attention briefly to 3 opportunities that include the chance to nourish your body, mind, and soul. For our story this morning, I invite any keiki out there who are not already forward on the rug here, whether you're a keiki at heart or a keiki in chronological order, you're invited to come forward and hear a story about being friends with the earth. So first I have a question. What does it mean to be a friend? Yeah.
Like someone you love and play with.
So you love your friend and you play with them? That's a good answer. Do you have something else to add?
When friends are usually there when you're sad.
Good. Yeah, friends are usually with you when you're sad or lonely. One more? Okay, one more.
Someone who's kind to you.
Someone who's kind to you. So those are great answers to be a friend. We have a story today about being friends with the earth, and the story is called The Earth and I by Frank Ash. And it starts, I just have some pictures for you to follow along. The earth and I are friends. Sometimes we go for long walks together. I tell her what's on my mind. She listens to every word. Then I listen to her. I listen to the rain. She sends me a rainbow. The earth and I are friends. Sometimes we play together in my backyard. I help her to grow. She helps me to grow. I sing for her. She sings for me. I dance for her. She dances for me. When she's unhappy, I'm unhappy. So I take care of her. And when she's happy, I'm happy. The earth and I are friends. So I encourage you all to be friends with the earth and go out and sing with the trees and feel the trees with you.
December 26, 2004, as a matter of fact, there was a 9.0 earthquake that hit off the coast of Indonesia. And this earthquake had produced a massive tsunami and devastated a huge part of Southeast Asia. Any of you recall this moment in our history? And as you may recall as well, thousands upon thousands of people died during this devastating catastrophic event on our planet. What was interesting about it, though, was that the scientists, and upon asking eyewitnesses in these areas, they actually mentioned that not a lot of animals died. So they didn't find a lot of animal carcasses as a result of the tsunami. And in fact, here's what the National Geographic said, that people reported that elephants screamed and ran for higher ground, that dogs refused to go indoors, or outdoors, I should say, and flamingos abandoned their low-lying breeding areas, and zoo animals as well rushed into their shelters and could not be enticed to come out. So somehow or another, these animals were able to pick up on the signs that there was an impending disaster coming along their way. Indeed, Alan Rabinowitz from the Wildlife Conservation Society of New York said that earthquakes bring vibrational changes on land and in water, while storms cause electromagnetic changes in the atmosphere. Some animals have acute sense of hearing and smell that allow them to determine something coming towards them long before humans might know that something is actually there. Sometimes this is called a quote-unquote sixth sense. And the idea around it is that we human beings, being part of the natural world and being part of the animal kingdom, also have such an ability. But somehow or another, we have lost it over the years. We have become disconnected to our environment and to our ecosystem to where we have lost this sixth sense. I wonder, for example, if we still had it, if 150,000 people in Southeast Asia would have died as a result of the tsunami. Instead of relying on sirens, which never went off, if we relied on our communication with the earth, could we have survived such a catastrophic event? I wonder about that. And I wonder too, if we didn't pick up on that message, what other messages is the planet trying to tell us about whether or not we're sustainable in terms of our habits and our lifestyle, and whether or not we're sustainable as a species, even in terms of how we relate to one another? I wonder. And you know what? G mentioned that we here in this church, as Unitarian Universalists, have 7 principles that we abide by. And most of us by now, I bet, know about the 7th principle of respecting the interdependent web of life, of which we are part. Yeah? How many of you know that we also have 6 sources that we draw from? And that our wisdom and our spiritual growth and nourishment comes from these 6 sources? I see a lot of shaking of heads. We're in trouble. But fear not. I took the liberty of actually typing up the 6th source and putting it up on the screen for you. So the 6th source tells us that we draw from spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Don't you just love that? That we draw from the rhythms of nature. That somehow nature has something to instruct us about how we live our lives. And indeed, I must say a shout out to the neo-pagans who made this 6th source possible, because they were the ones that said, hey, look, you know, I know most of us in Unitarian Universalism are very, is that left brain when you're very scientific and rational and all that? But there's another side to this equation, that there's also a part of us that needs to look at our surroundings and find out what Spirit has to say from that angle and from that level. And so, today we're going to be talking about that. And by the way, when you talk about the rhythms of nature, did anybody else think of that great song that came out a few years ago called Listen to the Rhythm of the Falling Rain, telling me what a fool I've been. Is that how it goes, Paul? Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But speaking of rain, however, again, another trivia for you. I was in a cave recently, and I got a tour of this magnificent cave. And for most of us, we may think that caves are dark, desolate places where surely life must not exist, because as we all know, we need sunlight in order to have life, right? But this tour guide was actually saying that the way that the indigenous people, the Native Americans, were able to tell that it was raining was because the coqui frogs would do their thing inside the cave. So whenever the coqui frogs would go, is that how coqui frogs go? Anybody from the Big Island here? That when they would do that, that's an indication that it's going to rain that day. After all, these folks back then did not have access to the Weather Channel, or they couldn't just look it up on their app. So it was the way that they heard from nature what the weather forecast was going to be like that day. And here's another trivia for you. She also told us that if, in the event that there would be a blackout inside the cave, the way to find the exit is by listening for the crickets, because the crickets tend to stay close to where there's still some sunlight, and so they're over by the entrance to the cave. Isn't that kind of neat? Survival tactics when you're stuck inside a cave. And it made me think about indigenous people in general and their connection to the earth. That unlike Western folks, they don't just think that the earth is inanimate or a thing to be objectified, or just draw resources from it without even thinking about what the implications are. That for indigenous people, the earth is actually personified as a friend. So in Hawaiian tradition, for example, we think of Ka'aina, the land, not as something that we could just step on, but an entity, a living, breathing organism that all of us need to respect in order for us to even have life ourselves. And even in the Western tradition, ever heard of Gaia? Anyone ever heard of Gaia? In Greek mythology, she was the goddess that represented the earth, right? And so, how can we have a similar perspective of respecting this entity, this figure, this living, breathing organism called the earth? So I was going back to the reading from the Ute Indians that Jean shared with us about earth teaching us. Remember what the first line of that reading says? Earth teach us stillness. Earth teach us stillness. And as many of you know, I'm one of those really high-strung type A personalities, and stillness for me is a waste of time. Oftentimes, because I'm always on the go. I just have way too many things on my plate, way too many things to do in order, and you know, who has time for stillness these days? But yet, a few years ago, me and my partner and a few of our closest friends took a trip. We went on a houseboat. So for any of you who are ever considering such a trip, I must say that it's a true test of friendship when you're stuck in a boat with people for 7 whole days in the middle of nowhere with no access to the phone, to your cell phone, or to the internet. So you are forced to talk to each other and to figure out what the logistics are of the trip, such as who's going to be driving the boat, and who's going to be cooking, and who's going to be cleaning up, and who's going to be doing all the chores that need to be done throughout the week. And needless to say, by the 3rd day, the temperature began to rise. And we were a little anxious and a little tense and a little short around each other by this time. And I'm sure none of you could ever relate to such a trip because you're all perfect human beings who have great relationships with your friends, right? And so by this time, I was in need of just getting away from everybody. So I took our little lifeboat out and docked it. And by the way, this was in Lake Powell. I don't know how many of you have ever been there, but it's on the border of Arizona and Utah and Nevada. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And you could literally get lost in the canyons. And so I decided to take my boat out and just dock it by the beach somewhere and just lie there. And as I was doing so, it was so silent that it was almost eerie. You start wondering to yourself, is there any other life form here, or am I the only one? And you start looking up at the sky, and there's not a trace of human life at all. So no skyscrapers, no planes passing by. It's just the clouds, believe it or not. And then you look all around you, and there's just trees. And you start wondering, has anybody ever walked these paths before? And am I surrounded by any other animal or life form here? And then came that moment when I was perfectly still and I perfectly let go to the earth, when I could actually sense the rhythm. It was almost like the heartbeat of our planet. Boom, 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 boom. And suddenly I felt connected and at one with my environment. And I thought to myself, there's only one word that could possibly describe this experience. And that word is spiritual. That my spirit connected with the spirit of the earth and with all the other creatures around me. That for that moment, I knew what stillness was like. And these days, whenever I'm asked in a meditation setting to go to your safe space or go to that place of comfort, I still harken back to that moment in Lake Powell when I was able to be at one and to truly listen to what Gaia had to tell me, to what the earth had to say to me. And I must admit, that moment was so healing for me. Earth, teach me how to regenerate my soul and my spirit that has been so overworked. Earth, teach me patience on how to deal with my houseboat mates. Earth, teach me courage to live life to the fullest and to have hope in my life. I wonder if what would happen if we really opened ourselves up and were humble enough to let Gaia, to let Earth teach us, other than us thinking that we have a thing or two to teach the earth that we live in. What would that tell us about balance and harmony, for example? Because clearly, we don't have balance with our planet, do we? But do we even have balance in terms of the way that we relate with one another? And if so, would we have this stupid thing called the shutdown, the government shutdown, or this whole debacle with raising the debt ceiling? If we could even figure out how to live in harmony with each other, in harmony with the earth, what do you think that would do in terms of right relationship? And what would happen, you think, if we were to go into a couples counseling session with the earth, with Gaia? What would Gaia say to us? Honey, I need to spend more time with you. Or please, how many times do I have to tell you, take out the trash? What other things would Gaia tell us that we ought to be receptive to and open to in order for that relationship to work? And so I suggest that for your homework assignment, go home and come up with a covenant of right relationship with the earth. And what would that covenant look like? What would it entail that would let the other person know, that would let your partner, the earth, know that you care about her and that you are willing to put that relationship first? What would that look like? You know, the earth, Gaia, has been around way longer than we ever have. Billions of years, as a matter of fact. So I bet she has wisdom and she has knowledge that we couldn't even begin to dream about. So my encouragement for us today is to begin to listen, to truly open up our ears and our heart to what Gaia has to teach us and the wisdom that she has to impart upon us. Make me so.